In the quiet town of Rancho Cucamonga, California, the Moffit family became the center of a terrifying and unexplainable phenomenon. What began as small, peculiar events soon escalated into a nightmare that would torment the family for 6 long years. With no clear solution in sight, the Moffitts turned to paranormal investigators and even religious intervention. But the evil force refused to leave. Was it a ghost, a demon, or something even more sinister? The haunting remains one of the most chilling and baffling cases of paranormal activity ever recorded. And to this day, its secrets remain extremely strange. The Moffit family haunting stands out as one of the most gripping and frightening cases in paranormal history. Throughout the 1980s, the Moffit family endured years of chilling encounters with what seemed to be sinister forces, leaving a lasting impact on anyone who has examined their ordeal. The family, which included Deborah Moffit, her husband Bill, and his parents, resided in what appeared to be a typical suburban home in Southern California. The Moffit family owned 3 neighboring properties on Archibald Avenue. Bill's late paternal grandmother, Dominica, had occupied the first house. The second belonged to Bill's parents, Bill Sr. and Lee, and the third house was inherited by Bill from an aunt. Due to a heart condition, Bill Jr. decided to live with his parents in the middle house to remain close to his family. After he and Debbie got married, they moved in with his parents as well. Before the haunting began, the family led a normal life, with no prior experience of paranormal activity or belief in the supernatural. However, their peaceful existence was soon to be upended by a series of baffling and unsettling events that would test their grip on reality and drive them to the edge of sanity. Debbie, who would later become a central figure in the haunting, described her family as close-knit and loving, with no reason to anticipate the terror that would soon engulf their lives. By 1987, Bill and Debbie had settled into Bill's parents' house, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. The grandmother's house had been rented to a local man, who eventually asked Bill an unusual question. Had anyone ever died in the house? He mentioned having used a Ouija board and claimed that someone had been responding to him. Despite his unsettling experience, he appeared more intrigued than afraid. Next, Bill Jr.'s home was rented out, marking the beginning of more unsettling occurrences. Bill, an avid collector of sports memorabilia, had stored some bobblehead figures of famous athletes behind a locked door in the house. The new tenant agreed that Bill could enter the home at any time to check on or add to his collection. One day, Bill discovered the bobbleheads on the floor, arranged in a triangle with a trailing tail, rather than neatly displayed on the shelves. The tenant insisted he had never entered the room or touched anything. While Bill accepted the explanation, he began to watch things more closely. In the days that followed, the tenant grew increasingly uneasy in the house and eventually left abruptly without any explanation. Although Debbie and Bill were unsettled by his sudden departure, they began preparing the home for a new occupant. While cleaning the living room, Debbie observed that every ornament on a shelf had inexplicably turned to face the wall, despite her having looked away for just a moment. At first, the family didn't suspect anything supernatural. However, as strange and increasingly bizarre occurrences became more frequent, they started to realize that something was deeply amiss. Debbie initially rationalized that she might have misremembered the placement of the items and shared her thoughts with Bill, who agreed, and they dismissed it for the time being. However, as Debbie continued cleaning, she noticed items mysteriously relocating from one room to another. A lamp that had been on a table would suddenly appear in the middle of another room, and keys would move inexplicably from where she was certain she had left them. As these incidents persisted, Bill began to suspect that there might be something more unsettling than simple forgetfulness or mistaken observation at work. Over time, the movement of objects became more frequent and noticeable, even responding to requests to do so. One day, Debbie boldly instructed the unseen presence to move something right in front of them. They waited, but nothing happened right away. However, when they later entered the dining room, they discovered that the heavy table had been shifted to the center of the floor. Around this time, Bill shared a peculiar story with Debbie about his late grandmother, Dominica. After suffering a stroke, she required constant care, which the family could barely afford. A local woman named Juanita offered to help, initially visiting daily before eventually moving in to provide full-time care for about 3 years. As Dominica's health worsened, Juanita, whose visa status depended on this job, grew increasingly anxious about her job prospects. Eventually, Dominica was hospitalized and passed away. Juanita came back to collect her belongings, but fled in terror after making a frantic call to Bill's mother, Lee. They rushed to the house to find Juanita running away from the house in fear, while claiming to have seen a ball of light chasing her. She apologized repeatedly, saying, "I'm sorry, I was only trying to help." As Juanita left, she warned the family never to enter Dominica's house again, claiming it was now inhabited by a dark and malevolent presence. She particularly urged Lee to avoid the house, given her deep religious beliefs. Despite her apprehensions, Lee proceeded into the house to prepare it for rental again. Inside, she discovered a disturbing scene. Blood, feathers, broken rosary beads, melted candle wax, and bizarre symbols scrawled on the floor. She immediately suspected that the house had been used for some sort of ritualistic sacrifice, possibly orchestrated by Juanita. Although Lee was a devout Christian, she was familiar with Santeria, a religion prevalent in South America and the Caribbean, known for its practices involving animal sacrifices to placate deities. Recalling Juanita's warnings, Lee felt that if she was right, any evil presence now inhabiting the house was likely brought forth by the former caregiver. Back at Bill's house, one particularly unsettling incident involved a large ornate mirror being shattered with such force that shards of glass embedded themselves in the opposite wall. A framed picture on the mantel didn't move when requested, but later when they returned from the kitchen, they found it placed on the dining room table. This made two things clear. The entity could move objects, even heavy ones, and it could hear and respond to them. For Bill, this realization was particularly unsettling, as the stress and anxiety were especially harmful given his heart condition. Debbie considered the possibility that Bill's late uncle might be simply playful, but soon the disturbances spread to all three homes. In the middle house, Lee's small altar was disturbed, with items like jewelry and even men's underwear appearing on a statue of Jesus. Additionally, they discovered a man's watch on the altar that belonged to the current tenant of Bill's grandmother's former house. Reactions among the family ranged from distress to amazement, with Bill Sr. remaining strangely indifferent. Bill's property was eventually rented out to a couple named Tom and Michelle. Although Bill had jokingly warned them that the house was haunted, the couple didn't take it seriously. Everything seemed fine until Debbie saw Michelle crying on the front steps with visible bruises. Michelle revealed that Tom had struck her during an argument the previous night, which was completely out of character for him. Despite Debbie's urgent pleas for her to seek help, Michelle refused. A week later, when Debbie checked in on them, Tom informed her that Michelle had left after another argument. Shortly thereafter, Tom also left abruptly without any explanation. Realizing they needed new tenants, Bill and Debbie prepared the house for rental. During a cleaning visit, they found the house unusually spotless, with the only oddity being a missing rug. While they were still preparing the house, a man knocked on the front door looking for Tom. When Debbie informed him that Tom no longer lived there, the visitor shocked her by announcing that Michelle's body had been found in a landfill, wrapped in a rug. After delivering the grim news, the man, who never revealed his identity, simply walked away. Debbie wanted to report the incident to the police, but Bill discouraged her, revealing that his father had connections to the local mafia. Reluctantly, Debbie agreed to keep the matter from the authorities. The family eventually decided it was best to sell all 3 properties and relocate further north. By 1987, the sale was completed, and as Debbie and Lee were packing for the move, they heard a terrible crash coming from the kitchen. When they went to investigate, they found that the cabinets had been torn from the wall and were now broken and splintered on the floor. Their attention was then diverted by the sound of breaking glass from a bedroom, where they discovered that every window had been shattered from the inside out. They quickly gathered the last of their boxes and left the house for good. By 1988, the family had settled into their new home, and everything seemed calm. They were relieved to have left the old properties and their unsettling experiences behind. However, one day Bill Sr. noticed that a framed picture on the mantel had been turned to face the wall. Although Lee dismissed it, she couldn't shake the fear that the entity from their previous home had followed them. Strange occurrences persisted, including pictures being moved and a burglar alarm going off whether they were home or away. One major incident involved Debbie discovering an ancient book filled with strange symbols and rituals. Then the tranquility of night was shattered by screams coming from the upper levels of the house, accompanied by unsettling knocks, bangs, and occasional whispers. When the family called out to whoever might be responsible, their names were eerily whispered back in response. The most bizarre occurrences involved messages written on mirrors and other surfaces throughout the house. The initial messages on the bathroom mirror included "Talk to me" and "No escape." Subsequent messages including "Leave now" and "You will die," intensifying the family's fear. Many targeted Lee with phrases like "I hate Lee" and using a nickname given to her by her sister. The messages varied from foreboding to seemingly helpful, occasionally warning them about problems with the house. One message simply read "Fools," suggesting the entity was toying with them. When Bill Sr. demanded that the entity reveal its identity, the name Prince appeared on the mirror the following day. Convinced they needed help due to the escalating dark activity, the family called a priest to the house. When he arrived, he merely stepped into the foyer, recited a few words, sprinkled some holy water, and then left. The devoutly religious Moffitts felt abandoned, and their hopes for closure were dashed. Angered by the ineffective intervention, the entity scrawled a chilling message, "Lee, die." Things took an even darker turn as they discovered rugs shredded as if clawed, and messages carved into the walls and floors. Many of these messages featured a symbol resembling a triangle with a tail, which Bill Jr. had previously seen in the bobblehead placement. This symbol became increasingly prevalent, appearing in etchings, writings, and even drawn with baby powder on a rug. Lee continued to be besieged, with her religious icons and figurines scattered throughout her bedroom. The statue of Jesus was repeatedly damaged, and a bedsheet was found shredded. As a result, Bill Sr. and Lee moved downstairs to stay with Bill and Debbie, but the messages persisted, remaining both cryptic and menacing whenever Lee was present. The Moffitts sought assistance from paranormal investigators, including noted parapsychologists Barry Taft and Kerry Gaynor, who had previously investigated cases such as the San Pedro poltergeist and the entity. Taft and his team conducted a thorough investigation of the Moffitt family's home, employing various scientific methods and equipment to detect and measure paranormal activity. Their approach centered on documenting and validating the family's reported experiences through audio and visual recordings, and then analyzing the data to better understand the nature of the disturbances. Additionally, Taft provided the Moffitts with consultation on how to manage the ongoing paranormal activity, aiming to help the family cope with their experiences and gain a clearer understanding of the phenomena they were facing. Although the specific details of Kerry Gaynor's cleansing rituals are less documented, they were aimed at mitigating or removing the malevolent presence and reducing the intensity of the paranormal activity. While the team did observe some of the physical phenomena reported, they were unable to resolve the issue. One group of visiting psychics claimed that the spirit was ancient and powerful. During this period, the activity escalated in violence. Objects, especially knives, were thrown at Lee. On one occasion, while sitting at the dining room table, she felt a sensation on her thigh and discovered that a knife had been forced through the cushion, making contact with her leg. The knives continued to appear in menacing locations, such as beds and chairs. On one occasion, 6 knives were discovered in a bed when the sheet was pulled back. The family's fear for their safety, especially Lee's, grew increasingly urgent. Even leaving the house offered no relief, as the disturbing symbols were found carved into the walls of hotel rooms where they stayed. Back home, the torment persisted. When they ventured out of the house, objects from the places they had visited would mysteriously appear upon their return. On one occasion, they found the name tag of a restaurant waitress who had served them, placed on their dining room table. The family increasingly invested money in paranormal investigators and self-styled experts, and decided to try a different approach by inviting Native American shamans they had met at a psychic fair. The shamans burned sage and spread the smoke around the property. Everything seemed normal until they reached the attic, where the smoke blew back at them despite the attic being airtight. One of the shamans declared that the entity was present and that it was time to take a stand. They began chanting to draw the entity out. Initially, nothing seemed to happen, but then Debbie noticed movement. The fiberglass insulation in the attic rafters began to shift, forming the shape of a figure with a horn wrapping around its head. Eyes seemed to materialize before the figure vanished, causing the insulation to fall to the floor. The shamans later confided that the entity was more powerful than any they had previously encountered, and suggested that its presence might be somehow connected to Bill Sr. They further claimed they couldn't banish the spirit because it had transferred to another life force, which turned out to be Penny, the family dog. Although this explanation seemed far-fetched, Penny was shortly found dead and diagnosed with Waldman's disease, an intestinal disorder. Whether her death was caused by natural or supernatural means remains unclear. A paranormal investigator introduced to Debbie by psychic Brian Hurst, and who remains anonymous, became involved at this point. On his first day there, he boldly confronted the spirit from the bathroom where the writings had appeared, and was later struck in the head by a book thrown from the second-floor balcony. During his stay, his clothes and belongings were shredded, and mocking messages about his sexual prowess appeared on the bathroom mirror. He also experienced knives being thrown at him, and one morning while seated at the dining room table, locks of his hair were mysteriously cut off in view of everyone. Disturbed by these events, he left the house and did not return for a very long time. Seeking further assistance, the Moffitts turned to renowned investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine, a clairvoyant, conducted a walkthrough and declared that the entity was an ancient and powerful demon. During a session, a dark presence filled the room, causing Bill Sr. to contort and growl as he menacingly approached Ed Warren. Ed then produced a shard of wood, claiming it was from the cross on which Jesus was crucified. Bill Sr. threatened to bite Ed's hand, but suddenly reverted to his normal state. The Warrens informed the Moffitts that Bill Sr. had been temporarily possessed, but the demon did not reside in him. It was attached to Lee. They recommended involving the church once again. A friend connected the Moffitts with an Episcopalian church, which upset Bill Sr., a practicing Catholic. When the Protestant priests arrived, they refused to let him in. It was shortly thereafter that Ed Warren called to inform them that there was nothing more they could do. The focus on Lee grew increasingly violent. She was shoved and on one occasion thrown into the pantry, where she felt as if she was being strangled, and bore the marks of the attack. In defiance, Debbie challenged the intruder, sarcastically referring to it as Mr. Entity instead of Prince. After giving birth to their first child, Debbie's maternal instincts intensified, and she demanded that Mr. Entity leave the family alone. Shortly thereafter, a message appeared on the bathroom mirror. "I will not touch your children, I will not touch your husband, but Lee belongs to me." More strange messages appeared, referencing 16th century monks who had performed satanic rituals and promised a nun as a sacrifice. The entity believed that Lee was that nun in a past life, and that the blood sacrifice must be fulfilled. Another message ominously predicted that Lee would die in 10 days. 10 days later, Lee fell ill with pneumonia and was hospitalized for several weeks. While the activity at the house decreased during her hospital stay, the visitations to Lee continued in the hospital. After returning home when she was deemed healthy enough, Lee confided in Debbie about her experiences at the hospital. She described how, whenever she was conscious, a black stain would form on the ceiling and slowly move across the walls toward her bed. A dark shape would then emerge, extending an arm toward her, but a lighter form, resembling an elderly woman, would appear as a sort of barrier. Lee was convinced this protective figure was her mother, who had passed away several years earlier. Lee had also returned home with an oxygen tank to help her with her breathing. She frequently woke gasping, discovering that the tubes were cut or detached. The black mass had returned and roamed the house freely. One night, Bill Sr. woke up screaming when he found a 16-inch long spearhead in his bed, an object none of them had seen before. A message soon appeared, instructing them to use the spearhead to kill Lee and providing detailed information about its origin from the Congo in Africa, along with instructions on how to handle her body after the killing. The spearhead was taken to the National History Museum of Los Angeles, where experts confirmed it was a 200-year-old artifact from the Belgian Congo and was in pristine condition. The Moffitts chose not to disclose how they had come into possession of the spearhead. In 1989, Evelyn Paglini, a well-known parapsychologist and occultist who frequently contributed to Art Bell's Coast to Coast radio show, took an interest in the case. Upon visiting the Moffitt home, she discovered threatening messages directed at her. After performing some rituals, she concluded that someone in the house was the source of the entity's power and had either intentionally or unintentionally invited it to stay. That night, Bill Sr. experienced convulsions and a severe coughing fit, leading Evelyn to believe they had pinpointed the source of the entity's power. She asserted that the name Prince indicated the entity might be one of the 7 princes of hell. Contrary to previous advice, Evelyn suggested that the best course of action was to befriend the entity and make peace with it. All of them, especially Lee, rejected Evelyn's suggestion as blasphemy and an affront to their religious beliefs and safety. Paglini left, and the torment persisted. Knives were discovered stuck into photos of Lee, and doctor's appointments were mysteriously canceled by someone not associated with the family. Bill Sr.'s demeanor dramatically deteriorated. Lee would find him mumbling to himself and staring at her from the edge of the bed at night. He chose to sleep in a bedroom on the 2nd floor, a location previously associated with activity. One night, Debbie was awakened by howling from that room. She found her father-in-law with his head tilted back, bellowing like a wolf. After shaking him, he simply fell back into bed and drifted off to sleep. The entity later took responsibility for his actions in writing. Desperate for a solution, the family considered an exorcism and brought in an independent exorcist. However, he insisted on cleansing the house rather than focusing solely on Bill Sr. Unusually, he requested photos and hair samples from everyone in the home. To keep Bill Sr. unaware of the exorcism, Debbie pretended the exorcist was just another investigator. During the ritual, Bill Sr. began to shift and spasm, prompting Bill Jr. to hold him down. His father howled like a wolf once more, but eventually slumped back into his chair. The exorcist announced that one demon had been purged from one room, but a more powerful one still lingered and couldn't be removed. He declared his work done, leaving the Moffitts with yet another disappointment. Soon after, Debbie noticed Bill Sr. ambling down the hallway and discovered writing smeared on the bathroom mirror. She suspected that Bill Sr. had communicated with the entity and tried to write the writing away. A new message soon appeared. "This little prick wants me to kill Lee. He doesn't command me." Debbie discussed the situation with Lee, who mentioned offhandedly that she had seen Bill Sr. going through her bank statements. Lee had received an inheritance that would go to Bill upon her death. Debbie wondered aloud if Bill Sr. might have concocted the whole thing, but the magnitude of the activity seemed too extreme for a mere hoax. Lee, rejecting the notion that her husband would want her dead, persuaded him to seek psychiatric help, and ultimately he agreed. During one session, Bill Sr. revealed everything that had transpired in the house. The doctors assumed he was having a breakdown and placed him on a 48-hour hold, followed by a 2-week evaluation. During his stay, the activity at the house dramatically decreased. When Lee eventually went to collect him, the doctors accused her of fabricating the entire story of Mr. Entity and encouraged her to stay for her own evaluation. Furious, she returned to the van where Bill Jr. and Debbie were waiting. Shortly afterward, Bill Sr. climbed into the van and told Lee that she was an embarrassment to them all. Lee instructed him to leave the house and declared that she was done with him. When they returned, Bill Sr. packed his things and left, but not before threatening that he would be back. In Bill Sr.'s absence, the activity began to wane. While objects still moved, the aggressive nature of the disturbances faded. The investigator who had left abruptly after his hair was cut returned, seeking a place to stay. After a few weeks, he informed the family that he had asked the entity to accompany him to England, where he had found a new job. However, the entity refused, stating it wouldn't work with an inferior being. Sometime later, Debbie communicated with Mr. Entity, suggesting that with Bill Sr. gone, the negativity was also waning, and it was time for him to leave. The entity inquired why it couldn't stay, but later announced it would accompany the house guest to England. As they saw the guest off in a taxi, they found a final message on the bathroom mirror. "Goodbye, my family." With that, the activity ceased. The paranormal experiences encountered by the Moffit family are among the most intense and varied ever documented. From poltergeist activity and apparitions to physical attacks and mysterious symbols, the phenomenon they faced defy easy explanations. The haunting also serves as a stark reminder of the impact of unexplained phenomena on the lives of ordinary people, and it continues to be a subject of fascination and study in the field of paranormal research.